With little progress made to end the US government shutdown, President Trump says he could declare a national emergency to access military funds for his border wall. On the eve of Orthodox Christmas, Egypt opens a new cathedral and a mosque. It comes a day after a bomb killed police outside a church. And thousands of people take to the streets in Sudan calling on President Omar al-Bashir, who's ruled the country for 30 years, to step down. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Orcott. Now we begin in the United States, where there's no end in sight for the government shutdown following a weekend of talks led by Vice President Mike Pence. The Republicans are refusing to budge on Donald Trump's demands for $5.6 billion for a border wall, and the president has now reaffirmed that he could declare a national emergency to circumvent Congress and spend money as he deems fit. Well, Tatiana Nasser now has more on this story.
On Sunday, President Donald Trump pledged not to bend in his demand for a wall along the southern border with Mexico. Instead, he has threatened to declare a national emergency, which would allow him to use military funding to secure money for the wall.
No, we're looking at a national emergency because we have a national emergency. Just read the papers. We have a crisis at the border of drugs, of human beings being trafficked all over the world. They're coming through. And we have an absolute crisis, and of criminals and gang members coming through. It is national security. It's a national emergency.
As an olive branch to Democrats, he suggested they build a wall out of steel instead of concrete. But for the time being, they refused to budge, with some claiming that this could incentivize the president to attempt further shutdowns in order to extract concessions.
But beyond that, this would be a terrible use of Department of Defense dollars. The president spends most of his time talking about how we're not spending enough on national security. Now he wants to take $20 billion out of the defense budget to build a wall.
The president also previously said he's ready for the shutdown to go on for several months or even years. As a direct consequence of the shutdown, around 800,000 federal workers have been without pay for the past 2 weeks.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump's national security advisor has been holding talks with the Israeli Prime Minister in Jerusalem, where Benjamin Netanyahu called on the US to recognize Israeli sovereignty of the disputed Golan Heights. Well, it comes as he and John Bolton were discussing the withdrawal of US troops from neighboring Syria, something the White House aide said will only happen if the Islamic State group is defeated.
Right on your border, we have the problem of the conflict in Syria. We're going to be discussing the president's decision to withdraw, but to do so from northeast Syria in a way that makes sure that ISIS is defeated and is not able to revive itself and become a threat again, and to make sure that the defense of Israel and our other friends in the region is absolutely assured. And to take care of those who have fought with us against ISIS and other terrorist groups.
And Bolton added that the troop withdrawal also depends on allied Kurdish fighters who helped the US against the jihadists being protected, and he will visit Turkish officials on Monday to find out what their objectives and capabilities are in northern Syria. Well, our regional correspondent Jasper Mortimer has this analysis.
It looks as if after America has withdrawn, the Kurds are still going to be armed, and they will look to Russia for the possibility of cutting a deal with the Russian-supported government in Damascus. Erdogan says the Kurdish militia are terrorists, and he points to their alignment with the Turkish Kurdish insurgent group, the PKK, and the fact that they have discriminated against Arabs in that part of northeastern Syria which they control. However, even if the Syrian Kurds were to cut their links with the PKK and treat the Arabs much better, Turkey wouldn't like them because it doesn't like the Kurds to be armed in Syria, because it sees such a force as the fighting force of an incipient Kurdish autonomous state, just as the Kurdish autonomous state in Iraq has a fighting force. But that looks as if it's going to be the future. Turkey will be dead opposed to it. We'll see what will happen.
Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has inaugurated a new cathedral for the Coptic Church, which celebrates Christmas this Monday, at the same time as a new mosque that was inaugurated. The highly symbolic gesture comes at a time that the Islamic militants are increasingly targeting Christians in the country, and during the ceremony, a minute of silence was held in memory of a policeman who was killed while defusing a bomb at a Cairo church a day earlier. This was the president's message.
In 2013, the Pope said, "A country without churches is better than churches without a country." It means that if we preserve our nations and keep them safe, we not only repair the damage, but we rebuild. And we are building 14 new cities with fully equipped mosques and churches.
Well, the former Army General al-Sisi has made sectarian harmony a cornerstone of his presidency, advocating equality between the Muslim majority and Christians, who account for around 10% of the population. Well, our correspondent Alexandra Bukianti earlier told us more about the significance of the new mosque and cathedral.
For President Sisi, it's very important because it justifies in a way his crusade or against the jihadists, and it gives him the possibility to say, well, if I'm so tough on them, if so many people are killed, it's because, in fact, I'm defending Egypt, I'm defending Christians, but I'm also defending Muslims. In the last 2 years, more than 100 Christians were killed by the Islamic State of Sinai, but also more than 200 Muslims, Sufi Muslims, were killed by the same Islamic State in northern Sinai, because for the Islamic State, they're not considered as real Muslim. Plus, there are hundreds of police and army men that have been killed, and this sort of security and the fight against terrorism was the reason for Sisi to be in power, because the Egyptians were afraid of this terrorism and needed, in a way, to have a tough guy, a military man. So it's even on the local stage, it gives him a sort of justification.
Several faculty members from Khartoum University have been arrested as they try to take part in anti-government protests. The demos have posed the most serious challenge to date against President Omar al-Bashir's rule, with thousands of people taking to the streets calling for him to step down. The 74-year-old has ruled since 1989, coming to power in a military coup. Cole Stangler has the details.
Freedom and peace. That was the chant from hundreds of demonstrators who took to the streets of Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on Sunday, calling on President Omar al-Bashir to step down. While they hoped to reach the presidential palace, the march was broken up by tear gas. The latest use of force against a movement that erupted nearly 3 weeks ago in response to a hike in bread prices. Al-Bashir's government, though, is planning its own show of force. Amid the fresh round of protests, the country's labor minister called for national dialogue and a pro-government rally this week.
There will be a big rally held Wednesday in the name of peace in Sudan. There will also be talks about what has been done over the past few days at the national level and in the different states of Sudan.
Since protests broke out, security forces have rounded up more than 2,000 people. 19 have been killed, according to the government, though Amnesty International says the toll is nearly double that. In power since 1989, al-Bashir has blamed the unrest on foreign plotters and shown no signs of stepping down.
And we'll end in Los Angeles, where the stars of the big and small screens are gathered for the Golden Globes. After the recent controversies of the Me Too movement and Oscars So White, the event's host Sandra Oh kicked off the 76th edition, cheering diversity and applauding the faces of change in the audience. Oh herself was one of the night's big winners, claiming Best Actress in a television series for Killing Eve. Elsewhere, Christian Bale won Best Actor in a musical comedy for Vice. That's the most nominated film of the evening, with 6 nominations. The Americans won Best Drama Series in its 6th and final season, while the Mexican movie Roma won Best Foreign Film. More updates on that in the next edition. For now, I'm going to be leaving you, and stay tuned to France 24. Back in a minute.